It's Recovery This Week. I'm Damon Frank.
And I'm Kevin O'Malley. I'm here happy to be your special guest today.
Kevin O'Malley, is here joining us as the special guest for Recovery This Week. Can't wait, Kevin. Look, every week we get together and we talk about like what's going on in our own personal recovery. Forget the show, forget the format, forget the interview stuff. We're just two people talking, two people in recovery talking about our recovery. And it's the week of, is it September 13th? It's the week of September 13th, which blows me away. That's
Yeah.
a little odd. I find that we're already halfway through September, but we've already been obsessed with my obsession with time moving fast. I feel like I talk about that every Recovery This Week episode.
Well, it is moving faster. It's definitely moving faster, and everything's moving faster since COVID. And some of the things you and I have been talking about, uh, offline is just what is recovery like today? What's happening for guys like you and me that have been sober a long time, over 30 years? How do we compare our days walking into a meeting, nothing except the meeting, maybe a phone call afterward. There weren't even cell phones, just in person. And now then we had COVID, and COVID created the Zoom meetings, and now we have a Zoom culture. I meet people that only ever got sober on Zoom, and I can't believe it. I mean, I can't imagine only getting sober on your computer. And these people are doing it. They're doing fine. But you know what? But now we have after COVID, and now the crazy life that we have with everything in the outside world. How do we make sense of it? And then how do we stay connected? And how do you and I have been talking about, how do we feel spiritual? How do we keep that sense of a connection that recovery has always been about, having that spiritual connection? It's the heart of AA when it was founded. It's the heart of or Dharma recovery and all these other things. But how do we keep that in a technological world when we're more and more isolated?
Recovery has changed. I think, you know, my opinion on what you're just saying, Kevin, is that I think we have to ask ourselves, hey, has it really changed or is it us? Right. Because I think as 12 step people, if you come through 12 step, you're always saying, well, what's my role in it? What's my role in it? Is that really true or is it my perception? I really believe that recovery has changed. I mean, just the fact that September is like National Recovery Month. Could you imagine having a National Recovery Month, having that awareness in the 80s and early 90s? There'd be absolutely no way. People were not having National Recovery Month back then.
Oh yeah, and this whole thing now was sober curious, which just makes me nuts. And as an OG AA guy, sober curious is like we would have tossed those guys out. So get the hell out of here.
Yeah, it
Come
has
back.
changed.
Yeah.
It has changed. Let's dive into that. I want your opinion on this because like how I feel about it is, there's part of me that says, okay, I'm jaded. Get off my lawn. Kind of the old guy, like get off my lawn. Like this is the way we did it back in the old days. And this is the way we're doing it now. And there's part of me that I've seen change a lot in the 12 step culture and just in the recovery in general. Some of the stuff I really like, some of the stuff bugs me, and some of the stuff really worries me. I think the sober curious thing, I think the ketamine thing, I think some of these things, that the medical marijuana thing, I've seen this kind of infiltrate a lot of the recovery houses, which we love recovery houses, but them infiltrating 12 step groups a lot. It bothers me because I see that we've lost some of the purity, I think, of the message. And I think with that, the success rate isn't as great. But also, just to throw this out there, it's also not the last house on the block. Remember them saying that, Kevin? Like,
Oh,
hey,
sure.
this is the last house on my. It's not. It's not the last house on. It's one of a bunch of houses on a block now that people go to.
Oh yeah, and this whole thing of ketamine makes me crazy. I meet people out and around that want to get sober, and they say, "Oh yeah, well I've got this really great ketamine therapy that I'm doing," and to me or just any number of approaches that are not how I got sober. They're just the whole sober curious thing that I was mentioning. How do you deal with somebody who's just not really desperate? I mean, when you and I first got into the program, it was based on what we call hitting a bottom. But
Hmm.
nowadays, there's people are not hitting a bottom. People are just, oh well, so it's a whole different modality. And
Well,
there's other,
not everybody's an alcoholic, Kevin, and this is the one thing that I have changed my mind on this a lot. And part of me, it rubs me a little bit because I'm like, ooh, that's not good. But then I've changed my mind because I've seen a different outcome. I think it's okay to get sober curious people now into the rooms of a 12 step. And I think it's also okay for them to pursue sobriety, forget 12 step, to see if it's right for them. Because I do believe just having the dialogue out there and the catch all to say, hey, let's like maybe we don't have to drink. Because I see my daughter's generation, a lot of them don't drink. Some do, but a lot don't. And that's a lot because of the awareness of like, hey, I don't have to be an alcoholic to understand that alcohol is not for me. I applaud that. Where it gets me is I see is that when non-alcoholics are going through treatment because they say they're alcoholics, but they're not really alcoholics, they have a much different experience. When alcoholics get sober, that's when the real trouble begins, in my opinion, right? Like it's not just the physical sobriety with alcohol.
yeah. Well, I have a friend who's a guy that I actually met through my participation in AA, and he was trying to get sober in AA, an older guy, and and he just could not stay sober. And then he decided he is not an alcoholic, and there's these other programs that are there's some program called medical maintenance or some kind of maintenance program, and he's going there now, but what he told me, which relates to our whole conversation. When I spoke to him afterwards, I said, "Hey, how are you? You know, I texted him, "How are you doing? What's going on?" He said, "Well, I'm doing okay. This program is working, but I really miss the spiritual component of AA." And I think that's something for me. You and I, offline before this, have been talking about how do you maintain that sense of a spiritual connection? How do you maintain the heart of AA is that there is a spiritual connection, which an alcoholic was trying to replace with physical spirits, trying to replace that spiritual thing. And then AA provides that through any number of ways. In early AA, it was more of a Christian way. Now it's all kinds of different ways. And you have Dharma recovery, that's a Buddhist way. But if you're only doing a thing that's based on a physical kind of abstinence,
Mhm.
then you're not required to get the spiritual connection. And so it's left out somehow. And I think that for me is if it's only about, oh, I'm going on the wagon, or it's only about I'm sober curious, I'm going to only have one drink today, then the person involved doesn't really get the beautiful gifts that people like you and I got from getting that spiritual connection in the early days. So I
Well,
don't know.
I don't think. Look, I mean, I agree. I agree with you on my own personal experience. Although I think that I think the counter argument with some people are is that look, you don't have to have a 12-step program in order to get sober if you're an alcoholic or drug addict, or you don't even have to define yourself as an alcoholic. Look, I know a lot of people who are science of mind people and religious people who say that saying the word that you're an alcoholic over and over and over and over again is not good for you. It's not good for your psyche. It's not good for anyone. I disagree because my interpretation of what an alcoholic is isn't negative anymore. It used to be. I will tell you, it used to be. I used to have shame when I said that I was an alcoholic. I don't now. And I think that's a little bit because of the awareness of alcoholism and the awareness of addiction. But I don't think everyone who's been addicted to something is an alcoholic. And I think that that's the big aha moment for me out of this whole COVID thing is watching people get sober online, watching people get sober not through 12-step groups. Not some people have addiction issues, but they're not alcoholics. They're not drug addicts.
Yeah. But what about the spiritual thing? I mean, you and I have been talking about how do you keep that sense of connection in your life? How do you keep, For me, when I first got into recovery, it was through crashing and burning and almost dying, and finding AA through a 28-day program, and then living in a halfway house and getting involved in classic AA. And really, it was all about stepping out of the isolation that was my drinking. When I was drinking, I lived in the cool part of San Francisco called North Beach, and my whole life was around the bars and the cafes and wine, women, and song, and having my notebook and being, and that whole scene. Very much the drinking was part of the scene. But what happened was that the sense of connection I had when I first got there got smaller and smaller, and then it just really became about me in a little bubble inside one of these bars where I was all alone. It was the anti-cheers. Instead of everybody knowing my name and being part of something, I was there, but I was all alone. And when I got sober, I got back into that sense of connection of the we. And I think for me personally, the biggest part of recovery is stepping out of isolation. Whatever kind of recovery it is, it doesn't have to be alcoholic recovery, and it certainly doesn't have to be AA, classic AA. But there is that move from being isolated and being alone to being connected to other people, and then through that connection with other people, finding a larger connection. It's certainly, you can be a monk on top of a mountain somewhere and be abstinent from alcohol, but it's not necessarily a spiritually rich life. It's not necessarily what Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, wrote this great essay. He gave it as a talk, and then it was distributed as a pamphlet, as an essay about emotional sobriety. And that's a great take on a larger view of AA, or a larger view of recovery separate from AA, is how do you have the emotional recovery? How do you feel good about yourself? So there's that. I think talking about any kind of recovery, there's a very important distinction between abstinence and what I think of as recovery. So recovery is in AA, classic AA, you've got 12 steps. Only the very first step, half the first step, says anything about alcohol. All the rest of them are about living emotionally and physically sober.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I, I think that's a key here to understanding what recovery means
Well, I
is,
think this disconnection though that you're talking about is I'm feeling that personally. Like, look, I've gone through several times in my life where I feel like my higher power, which I have, it's just God for me, is working in my life. And it's actively involved. Like I'm having that conversation. That is something I learned through 12 step programs, is having that, not having this outside God, but having this this inside dialogue and relationship, which I believe for me developed within a 12 step program. Other people get that in church programs, other people get that elsewhere. For me, that's where it came from. But I will tell you is like I will go through periods of my life, and one of them now is, and I think this COVID thing really made it worse for me, where I'll talk, but I don't hear anything back. I shared the other night that I sometimes feel like a third grader 2 hours after class let out and no one picked you up from school. What's going on? You know what I mean? And I do believe that like the solution for me has always been is to plug into a 12-step meeting, is to have conversations like with you or, people within my network, right? My sober network, because I could see God working in their life. And so if God's working in their life, it got to be working in my life too, even though I don't see it, right? Like, and I think that is the thing with the virtual means, is that you don't see it as much, God working in other people's lives. You hear it, but to really see somebody and be in front of them it's different.
yeah, I think that COVID really, I mean, COVID has destroyed the world. COVID has certainly destroyed America in terms of who we were and who we could be today. And it certainly has done a number on AA as an organization. My wife and I were living in Sedona, Arizona for a year, and having moved from Marin County in San Francisco, where tons of meetings, lots of people. In Sedona, there are only 2 or 3 meetings a day. The most people you get is maybe 20 people, 25 people at the big meeting on Saturday night. And you're happy when visitors are there, the tourists are there, and they come and visit the meeting. But the the whole thing of being connected, a lot of people in those meetings used to be big meetings, 50 people, and people left for COVID and they never came back. And they didn't necessarily drink, but they just didn't come back. And people, everything's changed. So, how do we navigate that? I mean, one of the things that you and I've talked about in the past is what happens to AA when the recovery houses and the programs come in. What what my experience of an AA meeting that is a set meeting of maybe 30 AA people, and then recovery houses start coming in a van and dropping off 30 people who are drug addicts and alcoholics combined, and but they don't have a commitment. They're just there to fulfill part of this program, and they come in, and what happens to the energy of the meeting then, and how I mean, for me, any kind of recovery is about the group. It's the in Buddhist things, it's the Dharma, right? It's the how who are you involved with? Who do you get for your support team in AA terms or recovery terms? Who is your support team? Is it just you? Is it online? Is it your family? Does your family really support what you're doing? And I have people that I know that I've tried to help along the way, and their family doesn't want them going to meetings or doing anything. They're very happy in the beginning that the father gets sober and stops drinking and stops fucking up lives and pulling knives on people on float trips and things. I mean, this is these are real experiences I've had. But yet within maybe a month, that same wife that was so happy to get her husband back is badgering him to not go to so many meetings because he's not taking care of his family duties. And how do in the AA Big Book, there's special chapters all about that. There's chapter to the wives and the family afterwards, but how do you integrate recovery into your larger life? How do you in these days there's so many things, so many work programs, and everybody has some kind of everybody in the corporate world has some kind of insurance that will cover a program, and it will cover this and cover that. But does the person really do it for themselves, or do they do it to get someone off their backs? I mean, that's another big recovery question, I think.
Well, I think a lot of it is, what I do love about the world of recovery right now is people have options. And look, if I think the answer for me has been, I realized a while ago that I couldn't just rely on 12 steps. And I think if you're a really big AA big book thumper, it'll even, I could go into that chapter and cite that. It's that this is just a beginning. I think really to have your best recovered life. And one of the reasons why we did the Recovered Life TV thing was because we wanted to have these deeper conversations. I think the problem with people like me and you've been sober for 5 years, you then 10 years and 15, then 20. And then as you go, look, when they designed Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, all this stuff, these people were not sober for 30 years, right? It is really designed around new people, getting new people being sober and using that service molecule, that special thing that alcoholics can use in which to keep themselves sober. But that service molecule is just one thing. There's other things too. There's other things that you could do outside of that. And I think that this is important. I think, we get fatigued by doing the same thing over and over. And I think sometimes we have to not walk away from what works, but we have to add to it sometimes. Because if not, you just don't appreciate it the same way that you did. And I think it's harder to see the miracle sometimes.
Yeah, and so let's talk about when you start to feel isolated and when you feel alone and you feel, you were telling me about uh, feeling like the kid left over. 2 hours after, and nobody showed up to pick him up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that whole thing of, classically, one says that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening to God. But a lot of times you will listen and there'll be no answer, you know, and you'll hear, and it's been hard for me in AA to hear really hardcore old AA Christian people that talk about, oh yeah, God, they talk about God a certain way. And my experiences of God's very different. My experience of a higher power has had many, many faces over 35 years. And so the the one thing I mentioned to you earlier was in traditional philosophy about meditation, there was this amazing book called The Dark Night of the Soul, which was written by a Christian monk in Spain, Saint John of God. And he talks about the dark night of the soul is when you don't have any connection with God, that you're left absolutely to your own devices. Like in AA recovery, we have this thing we call a pink cloud when you first get into AA, and then everything feels good, and your life is suddenly really, really good, and everything, and then the pink cloud goes away, and then life hits, and it's like the pink cloud is kind of like to get you in, and it's not. Everybody has it differently. It's not an assigned thing, but there is that question of what happens when you don't have that thing. Where is your faith? Where is your traditionally? Where is your faith? Now today, well, how when you don't feel any sense of spiritual connection, how do you maintain? How do you keep going? And it's really hard. I think one of the things of classic AA is that you always are told to talk to the newcomer so that no matter how much time you have, you will get reinvigorated by helping the new guy because you will see the miracles happening in the new person that happened for you in 1989, and you don't feel them anymore. But they happened for you in 1995 and they happened for you in 2017.
Yeah.
And then you have this new guy, and suddenly he's on fire with AA. You get reinvigorated by passing it on. You get reinvigorated by the next generation. And I think that's one of the good things about a 12-step program is that you get to be in contact with other people. And by having public meetings, people come to them and you have what used to be a random encounter in a bar, we have a more organized encounter in an AA meeting where people are new and you can say, hey, this is what worked for me. And classic AA says that you maintain sobriety by passing it on. And that was Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith in Akron, Ohio in 1935. And classic AA says that's still true in Los Angeles, California in 2024. Um, but my experience is that I do get that kind of connection and I do get that kind of uh, power, but I don't get it the same way I used to get it. And this is something my wife is sober 37 years, and but not as nearly as engaged in traditional AA as I am. But she has women that come to her and they especially about relationships. I mean, my wife and I met in AA 33 years ago, and we've been together 33 years, and still in love and still happy, and sponsor each other, and a lot of women come to her and say, well, hey, how do you do this? How does this work? And how do you have dignity and power as a woman with time in AA, with of a certain age? I mean, if you stay sober 37 years, you have a power and a dignity. And so I think there's something to be said for tradition as well. My
I think they're just to interject though. I think one of the things that I think that I have not that I agree with you on this, but I think one of the things that we're not seeing a lot, which I've kind of woken up to, is a lot of new people that are trying to get sober and are in recovery. They don't want the Bill and Bob life. And I think this is the thing is like, and we did like, I know when I get, I'm like, yeah, if I could just stay sober, if I could just be of service, if I could just do that. I don't see that. I do see it with some people. Like, I ran into somebody at a 12-step meeting, in Sherman Oaks the other day that I saw when they came in and now has 6 years. I see this all the time, but but a lot of the people, they don't want that. They see Bills struggle with depression. They don't want that. They don't want that, right? Like, and so I think we have to be open to the fact that they might get there and see the value of it, but it might not be their first year or 2 years sober. They might find a 12-step group later in their recovery.
Hmm. Well, I wasn't talking necessarily about Bill and Bob. I was talking where I started was just our presence today. I was talking about my wife, who I totally love, and we've been together. We're the classic AA couple, but we have maintained and stayed involved in AA, but stayed in love too, and stayed supporting each other. So I think that's a very important part of things too, is that if you have a partner that supports what you do, you're very, very fortunate. And that thing of finding love, but then sustaining love, maintaining and sustaining love, any kind of the love for your fellow man, love for a male-female relationship or a gay relationship. That is, I think, also a really important part of a larger kind of recovery is feeling feeling loved, feeling seen is for me the heart of recovery. I felt when I was drinking and doing all the drugs that I did along with the drinking, I felt like nobody could see me. I felt like I'd be in a bar where I knew everybody and I could drink for free and I could stay after hours. And I felt like nobody could really see me. They certainly didn't know me. They couldn't see me. To hell with them anyway, but let's have another drink and it'll be okay. And let's stay up all night and do cocaine till 7 in the morning, and we're best friends for life. And go to the bar that opened at 6 across the street and 6 a.m. and and then feel totally alone and totally lonely. For me, the opposite of recovery is loneliness. And so the benefit of 12-step programs is that you have a community that you can go out and be part of.
Mhm.
And you have a lot of AA meetings have it's harder to that it's harder to have a lot of time and go to an AA meeting, and they are targeted towards the newer people. Absolutely. My wife and I at various times have talked about, hey, how do we do something for people like us that we call AAA? We've talked about what
Mhm.
what is life beyond 20 years? What is it like? And it's not always about the newcomer, and it's not always about, oh, whoever got up first today is the most sober. Well, that's not true. My life is not the same as a guy who has a year or two, but I can help them. And but then what do I get out of it? And sometimes it doesn't come back to me.
Mhm.
It's not always satisfactory. So how and it's nice. We were at a 12-step meeting last night, an AA meeting, and there's a guy that I had met once before and heard him speak, and he's got about the same time as me, maybe a few years more. So he's got around 35, 37 years sober, and his wife is sober, and they're another AA couple. This guy's very active in AA around the country, and he had a great share, and very nice. But for me, hanging out with him is a different experience than hanging out with somebody who is brand new in the program, and it's a very different experience than hanging out with somebody whose problem is not really alcohol, but is maybe meth or something, and that's a hard thing too. That's how if you don't really understand someone's experience, which I don't understand what it's like to be a meth addict. How do I reach out to that person? What do I offer them? Well, I offer them the classic program of AA, but then they have to make it their own. And I think what you're finding and what you do in your series is showing that there's lots of other ways to approach that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So final thoughts here. What are you going to be working on, Kevin, this week in your own recovery? this next 7 days or so
Well,
next week? What's your goal?
I don't have a goal specifically. I mean, I have a meeting that I love that is my home group in Los Angeles, and it's in San Marino Men's Stag Thursday night. Anyone's welcome to come. It is a meeting that saved my life. It's a meeting that's a lot of guys with as much time as me, always new guys, but it's about how is your life sober today? How not even sober. What is happening in your life today? It's called The Week That Was. And everybody in the meeting gets to share. It's guaranteed everyone gets to share. But it's about how do you live sober today? How do you live in the moment today? How do you deal with your family and your kids and your job and problems and your aging parents? And this meeting was just a beautiful place for me when I started coming back down to LA 4 years ago to deal with my aging parents. This meeting just held me up. This meeting had my ass, had my back, covered my ass, and I could go there and I didn't have to be the guy with 35 years standing up in front of the room to tell you that everything in AA worked and here's how you can do it. I could just go there and express my pain. I could go there and express my fear. I could go there and put it out to the group. And so it wasn't just in my head or just in my guts. And there were people there that would support me. And I'm still friends with those guys 4 years later. And I make a point to be at that meeting every week because I know I can go there and be honest. And I think one of the keys for recovery of any kind is when we're out there drinking and doing drugs, we're not honest anymore. We lose any concept of honesty. And recovery, in a larger sense, is about being able to become honest again, maybe honest for the first time ever. But how do we claim that honesty that you can? And in the big book of AA, it says that our biggest problem as alcoholics was the inability to form a true partnership with another human being. In other words, to be honest with people. And AA talks about rigorous honesty, but I don't think you even have to have rigorous honesty. Just to have some kind of open, honest communication with someone other than yourself is the beginning of honesty. And
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. I know this next 7 days or so, over this next week, I'm really working on really trying on that spiritual connection, and then if not seeing it, if I don't experience it, try to see it in other people. Because for me, that's always been the way back, is to be able to see it happening to them, either inside of a 12-step room or outside. It doesn't really matter for me. But if I see it working in other people, it's my way back from being lost a lot. It's been great. This has been a great recovery this week. Thank you so much for coming on.
okay,
It's always fun to talk with you. All right,
okay,
guys, go out and live your best recovered life. We're going to make sure to add in the show notes any comments that you might have. And I'll also tag Kevin here on Recovered Life TV so he can answer any questions you might have. All right, guys.
okay. Thanks, Damon.
Thanks, buddy.
Hey, if you like this episode, think about supporting us by becoming a Recovered Life Plus member. At Recovered Life TV, we're not just delivering premium recovery resources, we're empowering you with the knowledge and tools that make a real difference in the quality of your recovery. By subscribing, you gain access to ad-free content, expert insights, exclusive video and audio segments, special projects, plus so much more, all while supporting our mission to spread the recovery message far and wide. Whether you're seeking to deepen your understanding or stay updated on the latest addiction and mental health recovery trends, Recovered Life Plus is for you. Subscribe now and start living your best recovered life. Just go to recoveredlife.tv and become a Plus member today.